Hello, everyone. I'm Major Garrett in Washington. Let me welcome you to The Takeout. Tough stories in Washington tend to follow a pattern. First, there is a disclosure that rattles the power structure. Then, there is an effort to deny, confirm, or clarify, depending on how the damage can be contained. Then, a story is established that concedes some disquieting facts, but attempts to put them in a broader, more defensible, or slightly more palatable context. We appear to be in that last phase now, after the Washington Post reported that on September 2nd, in the first aerial strike on a suspected drug boat in international waters, 2 passengers survived but were subsequently killed in a second U.S. military strike. The Post reported Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth personally ordered that second strike. The White House and Pentagon at first denied that report. Then they acknowledged parts of it. Today came a bit more play-by-play, with Hegseth sitting next to the president during a cabinet meeting, confirming he watched the first strike on a live video feed.
I watched that first strike live. As you can imagine, at the Department of War, we got a lot of things to do. So I didn't stick around for the hour and 2 hours, whatever, where all the sensitive site exploitation digitally occurs. So I moved on to my next meeting. A couple of hours later, I learned that that commander had made which he had the complete authority to do, and by the way, Admiral Bradley made the correct decision to ultimately sink the boat and eliminate the threat.
Then came the broader context. President Trump said drugs kill more than 200,000 Americans a year. He's labeled drug cartels foreign terrorist organizations, and he has said the U.S. has all the proof it needs that suspected drug boats, if left alone, would deliver cargo sure to kill Americans. Therefore, the president said they should be eliminated. Hegseth added, by any means necessary.
As I've said, and I'll say again, we've only just begun striking narco boats and putting narco terrorists at the bottom of the ocean because they've been poisoning the American people. And Joe Biden tried to approach it with kid gloves and allowed them to come across the border. Cartels take over community, 20 million people, hundreds of thousands of Americans poisoned. And President Trump said, no, we're taking the gloves off.
It is always problematic to challenge a Trump narrative with facts. Trump will say anyone who challenges his exaggerations diminishes or ignores the underlying problem. So let us be clear. Drug deaths in America are a crisis, have been since the age of opioid abuse dawned more than 3 decades ago. U.S. government data shows 105,000 Americans died of drug overdoses in 2023. 80,000 of them linked to opioids, and most of those to its synthetic substitute, fentanyl. Preliminary 2024 data show 80,000 Americans died of drug overdoses, 48,000 of them from fentanyl. Now, as this show has explained before, government reports also emphatically note that fentanyl does not come from Venezuela or neighboring countries. It comes primarily from Mexico, with chemicals that originate in China. And most fentanyl, government reports confirm, arrive in America in vehicles crossing through ports of entry or other parts of the southern border. Now, more than 80 people have been killed in boats struck by the U.S. military in the Caribbean and Pacific, hundreds upon hundreds of nautical miles from U.S. shores. Today, 2 Republican senators spoke out about the facts as they are currently known. North Carolina's Tom Tillis said the second strike on September 2nd, and there's some suggestion there might have been more than a second or maybe even a third or fourth strike, whatever it was, Tillis said constituted, quote, a violation of ethical, moral, and legal codes of combat. Here is Kentucky's Republican Senator Rand Paul.
I'm very, very concerned about an order that would say kill them all, kill them, after they've already been wounded, after they're drifting apart. But for some people, this is distinctly different, the second strike. I think both strikes are actually illegal. People don't realize these outboard boats have no capability of reaching America. It'll take them like 20 stops to refuel to get up here. In all likelihood, none of these boats are coming to America. It's a completely made up and false sense that, oh, we're at war, we can do whatever we want. But if Congress wants to vote on it, oh, no, we're not at war. So they're at war if they can do whatever they want with no oversight.
Weijia Jiang joins us now from the White House. A lot said in that cabinet meeting. And in response, I want to play for you in the audience, Weijia, something that Senator Warner from Virginia, John Warner, said just a few moments ago. He's vice chairman of the Intelligence Committee in the Senate about the defense secretary and what might clear a lot of the ambiguity or opacity of this situation up. Let's listen.
Secretary's claimed he's, a leader and tough, and it seems like he can't get his story straight whether there was a second strike or maybe even more in terms of third or fourth on this boat. And if there was no problem, why not release the unedited video? That would put a lot of this to rest.
We, as you know, and our colleagues at the Pentagon who cover the Pentagon know that the Defense Department puts out videos, but they are limited videos of what happened. And Senator Warner is suggesting more could be discovered.
Because, Major, the main question that these senators have, both Republicans and Democrats, is why there was a second strike. We heard from the Secretary of Defense himself, Pete Hegseth, say he watched the first strike, but he got up and left. And then he said a couple hours later, he was informed that there was a second strike. And the assumption to answer why is that there were survivors on that boat. That is what the Washington Post reported. And what I asked the White House press secretary yesterday, whether the reason there was another strike was to take out anybody that was left on the boat. And there is still no explicit answer to that because there's so much swirling around the legality of that very question. If there were people on that boat, the Defense Department's own war manual, Major, states that shipwrecked combatants are in a helpless state, and it would be dishonorable and inhumane to make them the object of an attack. So if the Navy Admiral Mitch Bradley, who is now at the center of all of this, did in fact do that, you have to ask him why as well. Was it in order to fill the initial order from Hegseth to kill everybody? Now, he has denied ever giving that order, but it gets murky, Major, because he has also said that his order was to destroy the boat. And they are characterizing the boat itself as a weapon, which President Trump also said because he claims each boat is responsible for killing 25,000 Americans with drugs. And so that is why they want to see the tapes. If there were, in fact, survivors after the first strike, presumably they'd be able to see those people on the boat somewhere.
That's information we will all look for. Maybe it will be forthcoming. Weijia Jiang from the White House, thank you so very much. CBS News national security contributor Sam Vinograd joins me now. Sam, pick up on where Weijia left off. That manual she referred to at the Defense Department, does that put Admiral Mitch Bradley in an uncomfortable situation?
It sure does, but I think we actually have to back up even further. While we look at the legality of this second strike and potentially a third strike and more, there are already outstanding questions about the legality of these strikes overall. The administration is relying generally on the president's constitutional authority as commander-in-chief of the armed forces to declare what they're calling a non-international armed conflict. Congress, certain members of Congress and various other voices are really questioning whether the president has the authority to just declare war anywhere that he wants without congressional authorization. Now, if we look at these specific strikes, Major, certainly there are questions about whether the individuals that are targeted can actually be viewed as enemy combatants. And then even if they are, the legality of striking individuals that are wounded, that are survivors, that are potential detainees is very clear. You just can't do it, whether under international law or domestic law. So I think we're going to see a broad discussion on the legality of these strikes overall, and then, of course, the follow-up strikes allegedly against survivors.
And there's an important sequence, it seems to me, Sam, because in October there were survivors of another attack, and they were rescued and taken to another country. Might that suggest that there was a quiet reappraisal within the Pentagon about this?
It might. I think every case is different, and JSOC, the Joint Special Operations Command that is working on these operations for the administration, has various rules of engagement and different folks engaged in these operations. But overall, if we're looking at what they're actually striking, we still don't know that drugs were actually on these boats. And back to your cold opening, Major, there are options other than striking and killing individuals to try to interdict drugs that are being trafficked. The U.S. Coast Guard, the U.S. Navy have a lot of experience in this area. And this is not just a zero-sum game of striking people to try to stop drugs from coming to the United States or doing nothing. There's a lot of in between.
And Sam, to remind our audience, when we talk about legalities in any sort of combat situation, there is the precise conversation about those whom the United States is interacting with, lethally or otherwise, but a broader conversation about what might happen to U.S. military personnel in another country in another situation.
There's a big amount of concern within the military community and just the American public that if the United States is treating foreign nationals this way, that just generally speaking, this could open up members of the U.S. military to all sorts of operations that would put them in harm's way. So if we're treating folks this way, this could expose our service members overseas and also just Americans more broadly. We are using a definition right now of enemy combatants that is very vague. We are using a definition of an imminent threat to the United States that is very broad. And there's just a general concern that that's opening up a Pandora's box if other countries start taking the same approach.
Sam Vinograd, as always, thank you so very much.